is one of four lead reporters on Newsday's undercover investigation on racial steering by real estate agents. Today's presentation, which is called Long Island Divided. The investigation, published in November of 2019, revealed that Long Island's dominant residential real estate brokerages help reinforce racial segregation through illegal steering of customer. Newsday's team received several national awards for their work, including a Peabody Award. Long Island Divided and its 40-minute documentary can be found online, and we'll be providing those links to you. Bill has reported for the Associated Press, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, and the Boston Globe. So it is my pleasure right now to introduce you to our speaker today, Bill Dedman.
Thank you, Twiss. And thank you, Will, and everybody who helped make this possible. I really appreciate you spending the time this afternoon. I'm excited to have an opportunity to share with you our Newsday team's work on fair housing. You know, it might be surprising to you. It was surprising to me that NAR and real estate associations around the country have responded positively to a newspaper's investigation. It seems that our Newsday team's tests on fair housing have sparked an important conversation and also action, with industry leaders saying these are practices that must change, and soon. A couple of examples. When the head of Realogy, America's largest real estate company, which, as you know, owns Coldwell Banker, Century 21, Sotheby's International, when that CEO says, we should be testing our own agents and brokers for steering and unequal treatment of customers, well, then something has changed. When several realtor associations at the state level and some in large cities have begun to organize programs to test their own members for unequal treatment of customers, then change is happening quickly. And when NAR has embraced this idea of self-testing of agents and says, yes, we'll help make that happen, more change is coming. The thinking seems to be, if we don't get ahead of this, policing ourselves, we'll have more government investigations, and we'll keep having these kinds of media investigations embarrassing us, damaging our brands. Besides, there's a recognition that it's the right thing to fix this and that fair housing is the law, not just in April. My goal for this session is for it to be helpful to you, but also challenging, giving you something to think about. How does it work in our office? How can unequal treatment creep into our day-to-day work? We can dive together into looking at a few clips from our Newsday video of real estate agents in action, admittedly not on their best days. And we can focus on best practices, steps that brokers and agents can take to treat everyone equally. As we go, I urge you to keep a list of specific steps, specific thoughts, changes, practices, policies that you and your brokerage can take. And then we'll compare lists at the end. And we'll talk about some of the most difficult questions, such as what agents can say about schools. I start from this perspective. I assume that all of you want to make sure that every customer who calls or emails or walks into your office is treated fairly.
Bill, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your perspective. You won the Pulitzer Prize for an investigation into mortgage lending practices. I thought it might be interesting for our members to hear a brief summary of that investigation. And how does that investigation compare with this one?
Yes, a couple of links between them, a couple of lessons to be learned. The stories in the Atlanta newspapers you mentioned were called The Color of Money. They're online, you can read them. The stories were about redlining, the practice of mortgage lenders, particularly banks and savings and loans, doing business on one part of the map, but not another. Now, this was back in the late 1980s, and redlining had gotten a lot of attention earlier, but seemed to be thought of as something from the past. We found lenders in Atlanta and other cities making home loans in white areas, even lower income white areas, but no loans in black areas, even the higher income areas of Atlanta that were home to Coretta Scott King and the mayor and executives from Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. The customer, remember, would have no way to know where the banks didn't make loans. But we looked at how the banks operated. We found differences in where branches had been opened and closed, differences in which real estate agents the banks marketed to, even which branches would accept a loan application. And I'd like to make a connection to a later project for the Boston Globe in the 2000s. We looked at racial profiling in traffic stops in Massachusetts. Our series was called Speed Trap, and you can read it online. It wasn't about who got stopped. It's about what happens after you're stopped. An interesting thing about being stopped by an officer for speeding is that we all deserve the ticket. We're all pre-qualified for the speeding ticket. But some people got a break that others didn't get. What we found was that in Massachusetts, when we looked at every ticket and warning in the state, it's pretty easy to predict who gets a ticket and who gets a warning if you know the race, sex, and age of the driver. For example, women much more often got a warning than men, especially younger women. I talked with a college student. She had gotten 4 warnings in 3 weeks. Women, does it surprise you that this
Thank you. So we can listen to our meeting.
that this break for women runs out at about age 40? Minorities much more often got the ticket, especially younger Black and Latino men. Now, how does that have anything to do with banking or real estate? Again, the customers wouldn't know, call the drivers customers. Maybe even the officers wouldn't know how it breaks down. Now, taking together these 3 very different stories, redlining, traffic tickets, steering, and real estate, what are some lessons? First, the absence of complaints tells you nothing about whether your office is obeying the fair housing laws. Bank customers, drivers on the highway, real estate customers have no way to know if they're being treated equally. If you get a warning, did everyone going that speed get a warning? Does a real estate customer know what listings another customer is given? So in real estate, a fix for steering is not to say, well, we respond forcefully to all complaints, but no one ever complains. How would they know to complain? Second, diversity efforts alone will not solve this problem. Diversity in hiring and promotion, retention is useful in many ways in your business and mine. But it's not a cure-all. People often ask, well, were the minority real estate agents also discriminating? Yes, and that's just as illegal. We found real estate agents of all races and backgrounds steering customers, just as we found white and Black and Asian police officers treating minorities different from whites. We should no longer be surprised about this. Everyone has biases. Everyone has stereotypes. But treating people differently is illegal whether you're in their group or not in their group. Third, small actions, small policies, maybe unintentional ones, or just the absence of supervision can have a huge impact in creating and perpetuating a segregated system. For example, it seemed clear that the realtors in our tests didn't have a standard for what they do and don't do with every new customer, no checklist. We saw customers come back with thick folders of information, others with skinny folders from the same agent. That seems like something you can fix. Do agents have consistent ways of qualifying customers? Do they ask credit scores and income of everyone or no one? Do they require pre-approval from every buyer? That's legal. Or do they require pre-approval from no one? You'll help them get ready for buying a home. You'll train them. You'll refer them to lenders. That's legal. It's in between where you have a policy, but some people get a break that others don't get. That's where you end up before a state disciplinary board. I'd like to show you an introductory part of our documentary film from Long Island Divided. One customer in this example receives service from an agent, while the same agent refuses to help another customer in the same circumstance. Let me start this clip for you. Just a moment.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it, you know.
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to send you anything you want to get, unless you don't want to start your car to buy your friend.
Or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way.
Yeah, okay, I definitely need that.
Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, you shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester, and they met with
Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor.
They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
Pre-qualified, I guess. My husband's working with somebody in a bank. We've done some preliminary talks, you know, about getting pre-approved.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out anyone unless you have a pre-qualification letter. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny Mae couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
So, Bill, can you tell us, why did Newsday start this investigation in the beginning?
Oh, yes. Why is the newspaper running around sending out testers? Let me set the scene. Long Island, some of you may know, stretches east of New York City. It's a suburban area, 2 counties, with almost 3 million people. And Long Island has a lot of diversity overall, people from all races and nationalities. But minority groups, especially Black homeowners, but not only Blacks, are concentrated in very few communities. For example, out of more than 200 communities on Long Island, a majority of the Black residents live in only 8. Now, is that by choice? We had long heard from Black homebuyers who had encountered problems when they tried to shop for a home outside of those few areas. So Newsday followed the methods that were used by fair housing agencies, sending out testers, with the addition of hidden cameras to record video and audio. Now, a point about the law. That's legal in New York. That's legal in most states. Most state laws say recording is legal if one person in the conversation knows it's being taped. And that one person can be the home buyer, the tester. But hidden recording of audio is not legal in a dozen states, including Florida. In those states, everyone has to know they're being recorded. But don't think you're off the hook. We can still do testing. We can interview the testers and have them write down what happened, fill out a form. We can monitor the texts and emails between the testers and the agents. And most of all, we can see the listings that agents give to each tester and make a map of those. The main reason we did testing is that it's the only way to see reliably what is happening. And to get away from anecdote, you know, our testers often came back from the real estate office telling us that agent was so nice. She was so helpful. They only learned the truth, whether they were treated better or worse, when our team brought the buyers together to watch the videos and to see the maps of the listings that they were given. Now, I'm gonna dare the gods and play another video clip for you. And you'll meet some of our testers here, and you'll hear from a fair housing expert who works with them. And you'll meet one agent here, a second generation realtor, who has a different game plan for different buyers. Here, let me start this video for you. We're all going to cross our fingers. Okay, just a second. I'm going to share the screen and all hope for the best. Here we go.
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race, and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test. And you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, you know, it's okay, it's good, you're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, you know, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map, I remember that.
Yeah, he had the map, and he's like, you know.
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school districts, safety, you know, crime, resale.
You know, this agent with the map, he looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily, but he had a different plan for home buyers of different races. For the whites, it was don't get off this highway until you get past those neighborhoods. And that was a pattern that startled us when some agents began their presentations to the buyers. Remember, these were new customers. They just met them with inappropriate comments or with guidance that violates the fair housing laws. I hate to say it, but for these agents, it seemed that steering was part of the service that they were selling.
So, Bill, please give us a summary of the tests. Who was tested and what was the outcome?
Yes. So, Twist, our Newsday team focused on home sales only. We didn't look at rentals in this test. And we'd send a white home buyer and then a minority home buyer, and we would mix up the order of who would see the agent first. The home buyers gave the agent the same circumstances. They were first-time home buyers, so selling another property was not involved. We chose testers of the same gender and age. We dressed them in the same business casual style. I went shopping at Nordstrom for similar purses for the women to carry. They asked for the same geographic area, the same price range, and the same number of bedrooms. They had a number of children in the public schools. and they were prepared to give the same income and credit scores, but rarely were asked any financial information other than what job do you do and mortgage pre-approval status, on which, as you saw, they're the same. They weren't pre-approved. We shopped for houses at different price ranges. Now, always the same price range for two testers who were paired up together, but we did tests from entry level. Now, on Long Island, entry level was about $400,000, so we started there, up to a higher end, $7 million. Now, $7 million won't get you Alec Baldwin's house out in the Hamptons on Long Island, but it will get you into his neighborhood. Of course, then you would have Alec Baldwin for a neighbor. Now, how did we pick the agents? We didn't pick them. We let the brokers decide which agents would be tested, though the brokers didn't know they were doing the picking. Whoever they had on the board, whoever was working the desk, whoever was handling walk-ins or phone calls or internet contacts to the office, that was our agent. Then we would make sure that the second tester would get the attention of the same agent. We did not have to do this. Under the law, brokers, you're expected to provide the same service to two customers, even if they see different agents. But we thought it would be a better test to see what would happen if the customers saw the same agent. So we gave the brokers a break there. We did 86 of these tests at 12 companies, 12 brands. We chose them because they're the largest in our area. Together, these 12 have more than half of the listing market. And they include familiar names: Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax, as well as regional brands that are particularly big on Long Island, Douglas Elliman and some smallers that you haven't heard of, but are big there. We didn't feel comfortable being the referees, so we had two fair housing experts review each test for equal treatment. One you met runs a fair housing program and has done testing for the US Department of Justice. And the other is the law professor from the University of Kentucky who writes the legal textbook on fair housing law. Only if both of our referees independently threw a flag did we call a penalty on an agent. But we didn't publish yet. Our team gave the agents and brokers all the details, invited them in to watch the videos. We put their videos and their responses online, so there was no out of context. This was, in other words, a careful effort. It took 3 years for a team to complete. Now, the results. Asian American buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 19% of the time, so 2 out of 10 on average. Latino American buyers were treated differently than whites 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And African American buyers were treated differently than whites 49% of the time, 5 out of 10. Most of the attention has been on that high difference for Black customers, and that makes sense in light of historic discrimination and current events. But I'd say don't lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 of our Hispanic buyers or 2 out of 10 Asian buyers were treated differently half a century after we passed the civil rights laws, those seem like high numbers as well. Out of 12 companies, only 2, and these were 2 very small regional brands, were the only ones to pass all of their tests. So it's fair to say that most of our national and regional real estate companies were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. Now, you no doubt have already asked yourself the most important question: would the results be any different if we repeated the test in your communities? If this weekend, white and Black and Latino and Asian home buyers go shopping for homes in your neighborhoods and school districts, or Christians and Muslims and Jews, or couples with children and couples without children. If they're searching for homes and they have the same criteria that they give the agent, then on Monday morning in their email, will they be receiving the same listings? That's the test. Let's discuss what sort of differences we saw. We saw different levels of service. Overall, our white testers got 50%, 50% more listings than their Black counterparts. We saw differences in how buyers were screened. Some agents refused to help our Black or Hispanic buyer unless they signed an exclusive contract. That would be legal. They said that was the policy of the brokerage. But the same agent didn't require a contract for the white buyer. And we saw steering. For example, the agents in our test gave listings directing 1 out of 4 of our minority home buyers into different communities and different school districts altogether. No overlap with the areas that whites were given. And then there were inappropriate comments by agents, making comments about the race or ethnicity or religion of people who live in an area, or comments about the schools, comments about crime, about resale value, as a way of encouraging or usually discouraging someone from looking in those areas. That's steering, especially when the agent gave contrary information or left out that advice for the other buyer. We heard agents tell white buyers to avoid an area because of poor resale values while encouraging the minority buyers to look there. It was fascinating. Minority buyers did not hear racial comments or inappropriate remarks. We're long past the days of signs that say whites only. It's more subtle now. Only the white buyers heard the inappropriate comments about race and its proxies, schools, crime, and resale values. Here's a video clip that highlights this problem of inappropriate comments. Let me play this for you. Okay, I'm going to share this. Someone asked where this was. All of this was in Long Island, New York, just east of New York City. I'm going to play this video.
Hispanic community came in, and they really took over Springs in Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
I like Freeport. Now you have a bad school district, and that's not good for resale value.
All the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. We need United Nations.
Because you might be more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily one way or another in terms of the people.
Bayshore has 2 school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district.
I can't say anything, but I encourage you. I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night with your wife to buy diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it. You know, you have the knowledge of the areas.
Yes.
You know. I don't want to use the word stealing, but I try to use another word. I educate in the areas. You know.
Yeah. How are you, Russ?
Hey, Russ.
Good. How are you?
We're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be. I don't think you should be in Almont. I think you should probably just be Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, you know, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No, like a horse, even.
You know, it may be that some agents have gotten a message through the years, through their training or office culture, that that complying with the fair housing laws is some sort of political correctness, that it means not saying the wrong thing, or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it. One fear I have about the impact of our project is that the comments made by the agents were so shocking, so far over the legal line, that they sort of get all the attention, right? We may forget that they crossed the legal line when they gave different listings to different customers, even without the illegal comments. It may be that we need more attention to steering, to differential treatment, more attention to what people do and not just what they say. Are they giving the same advice to all clients? Are they treating all clients equally?
So, Bill, we've been talking about steering, and this is an important topic for the members that are present today. So can you elaborate on how steering showed up in your tests?
Yes, Twist, steering sort of a catch-all term. It's used sort of broadly to cover a lot of different kinds of behaviors. We've been talking about this in terms of individual buyers. Think about it for a moment, neighborhood by neighborhood. Both of our testers would ask for an area. I need to be within half an hour of Northport, or a 30-minute commute to the city, that sort of thing. Well, that creates a circle around Northport, right? That circle might include many communities and school districts, and they vary in race and ethnicity. But sometimes in the wider residential parts of that circle, listings would be given only to our white buyers. So we all see minorities in those cases are being steered around those communities. That's what we were testing for, right? We also saw something else that we didn't expect. We had minority communities where no one of any race got the listings. These minority areas are within the circle for both testers. There are homes for sale in that price range. But the agents didn't send those listings to either tester. These were the communities with more than a modest amount of Black population. And the pattern might be different in other areas, but that's what we saw. The agents ignored those areas for everybody. Well, that's steering too. Our legal experts said, wait a minute, who has the lawsuit under the fair housing law in that case? It's a very long list. Not only are the minority and white home buyers being steered illegally, mark that, both the white and minority home buyers are being harmed by being steered around the minority communities, but the communities themselves are being harmed, and the governments, and anyone who is trying to sell a home in those areas, and their listing brokers. All of these could have a lawsuit under the fair housing laws against the brokers that are steering everyone around their communities. And you understand why. Fewer buyers means lower sale prices, lower home values, lower home equity, less money to send the grandkids to college, and less tax money for schools and parks and libraries. You might say, oh, but the two testers were being treated equally. When I gave you numbers about the percentages of tests where they were treated differently, that didn't include all the tests where the agents broke the law by steering both buyers around minority neighborhoods. It's still steering, and it's still illegal because under the law, you owe equal service to those sellers too. Now, here's a video clip with a classic example of steering. The simplest definition of steering: directing buyers to areas that match the buyer's race. Here, an agent tells one family, now this is a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager in the public schools, tells them that a community would be a good place to live with the nicest neighbors. While the same agent warns another family, a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager in the public schools, warns them that the same community is a dangerous place. Let me play that for you. Okay, we're going to share this with you. It's coming around on the guitar. You ready?
Kelvin Toon is a black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're the nicest people.
When we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place.
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood.
Okay.
And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going
Do you want to
visit.
give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white testers saying there was concern about gang activity going on in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the black tester. The listings centered black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
Now, let's think for a moment about what point did this agent go astray? The text message about the gang activity gets our attention, right? That's the memorable part. But focus for a moment on the listings. Remember, both men were asking about an area that had Brentwood at its center. One of them had his mother was in a nursing home in Brentwood. The other one, his wife worked at the hospital in Brentwood. That was the center of their search. She sent listings in Brentwood to the black family, but for the white family, she ignored Brentwood entirely. Even when the white buyer went on a home tour and said, hey, we printed out from online some listings in Brentwood, they're closer to where we need to be. He's throwing her a life ring to pull her in from the boat. She still didn't show those houses. And she sent the note about gang activity. The comment is a problem, but don't lose sight of the map. Why didn't she give both families listings in the same area that they asked for?
So, Bill, do you think that the agents included in the documentary were knowingly steering? I mean, some agents may believe that if steering was unconscious or unintentional, that it wouldn't rise to the level of violation. So can you address that?
Yeah, this is an important point. Some agents did whisper or say out loud, I shouldn't be saying this, but that's the real estate equivalent of, buddy, hold my beer. Something bad's going to happen. But as you know, the first point to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all if the bias is intentional or not. The Fair Housing Act and state laws cover behavior, not thoughts or motives. The law is not a mind reader. It's the effect of your action, not your intent, that determines whether or not it's legal. If a real estate agent is treating one person better than another similarly situated person or different, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Federal Fair Housing Act, then the agent and the agent's broker have violated the law. To remind you, the categories in the federal law are color, race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and family status, usually meaning having children or expecting children. State laws often add additional protected classes. Now, although practically intent doesn't matter, it is interesting to speculate about the motivations of the agents. If you want to stop something from happening, you have to consider why it's happening. We're understanding now that bias can be explicit, it can be intentional, conscious, or it can be implicit. Sometimes the term scientists use is unconscious bias. Sometimes they call it implicit bias. Either way, the point is people who want to be fair can still act in unfair ways. Now, we can treat people differently based on a stereotype about their identity, their appearance, their skin color, their hairstyle, their accent, even their name. Names send signals about color and about status and education of a family. We see this in studies where identical job applications, resumes are sent out with different names, and the white names get a better response. In real estate, in a multiple offer situation, that's a good reason that NAR and others suggest that sellers' agents present multiple offers to the seller with no names, just the relevant dollar amounts, offer number one, and the terms and conditions that are relevant. And this protects the seller and the seller's agent from breaking the law or being accused of it. The seller shouldn't know which offer came from a Jewish family or an Asian family. I want to give you a little example from our study of traffic tickets in Massachusetts. People got a break in their hometown. You're stopped in Malden, you're less likely to get the ticket, more likely to get a warning. Doesn't that make sense? You might be the mayor's brother-in-law. You're a taxpayer in that town. And that was true only for whites. For Black drivers, they were more likely to get the ticket in their hometown, not the warning, for going the same speed. That sounds like it could be an example of implicit bias. Maybe even the officers don't know how it works out. And here's a similar example from our study of real estate agents. The agents in our tests were more likely to tell the buyer where the agent lives. The agents were more likely to say, oh, you're looking in Northport. I live in Northport. Or my kids went to school at Northport High School. More likely to divulge that information if the buyer was white. Minority buyers were less likely to be told that information. One of the agents was offering babysitting to the white buyer. You're looking in that area. I live there. I have friends who can sit for your kids. But the minority buyer had kids too and had mentioned them, and the agent didn't tell her that she even lived or knew anybody in that area. That could be an example of implicit bias at work. Now, some agents may be profiling, maybe consciously or not, thinking that, well, the person of color can't really afford homes in the price range they've given, or can't qualify for the mortgage, or maybe wasting their time while accepting the price range from a white buyer. One of the tricky things about profiling is that experts in many fields keep trying to tell us, it doesn't work. It's not just that it leads you to some violation or political incorrectness. The problem is that it wastes our time. Let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening in schools. Which kids play violent video games or dress a certain way? These have not been shown to be good predictors of who's a school shooter. As every parent understands, that profile would fit way too many kids and might miss the kid who's planning an attack. Now, what's a better predictor? Stockpiling weapons, having grievances at school, telling other students of plans, don't be in the cafeteria on Thursday. Conduct, behavior are better predictors than the type of person. Well, in real estate, what does that mean? You're in a commission business. It means you leave money on the table if you assume that people of color can't be good customers. Besides, why did we mention it? Steering is illegal. Now, some agents might think, consciously or not, that it'll save time to sort people, to show you homes where you feel comfortable. You heard an agent say that. But why assume that people want segregated neighborhoods? Why even assume that the person standing in your office or sitting with you in the coffee shop isn't married to someone of a different race or religion? Besides, steering is illegal. Agents might fear that appraisers or lenders may be biased. makes it harder to close a sale at the sale price. There is a lot of evidence going back for decades and right up to this year, large studies showing bias in appraisal and in lending that are not accounted for by the objective facts. And these subjects are getting a lot of attention from industry groups and from HUD. Meanwhile, the legal burden is on you to treat every customer fairly. There's a final logical explanation for steering. A few agents may be doing it on purpose. I just assume that's not the common situation, that it's not out of some explicit prejudice or bias. There's just too much steering going on for it to be accounted for by only bad people doing it. Good people have to be doing it too.
So what role did schools play in the actions of the agents?
Oh, our agents in New York explained to buyers everything's decided by schools. Agents would tout one district over another. Some are blue ribbon and others are declining. Often those agents gave different information about schools to different buyers. If we get just a little context on this and step back for a moment, schools vary in America by race and other characteristics of the students. And that means that directing someone to a certain school or school district is the same as directing them to an area with higher or lower minority population, even if you don't mention race. It is a surprise. But schools in America are more segregated now than they were 30 years ago. And of course, school segregation and housing segregation are intertwined because we have school districts. Now, can you talk about schools at all? Our experts were very clear that the Fair Housing Act doesn't prohibit you from answering questions about schools. You can answer factual questions. You can refer customers to websites with information about schools. The legal line is crossed when the agents are picking and choosing different districts for different customers, or making comments about school test scores or demographics or desirability of schools, comments to steer some customers away from certain schools. Here's a discussion of schools from our video, and you'll meet the law professor from Kentucky who was an advisor on our project. Let me start that for you. Okay, here we go. Ready?
I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville School District?
We're going to try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now because of the school district.
This part, the Salisbury part, is in demand because the schools are much, much, much better.
In Newsday's 86-pair test, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two, and the only difference is their race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
You only want, if you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 23. Okay. You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville, and you're not going to like those schools.
The agent there who was making a list of schools, she helpfully wrote down a list and sent our testers from her real estate agent back to our newspaper office carrying different lists. Now, how do you discuss school quality without violating the fair housing laws? The clear advice from NAR and our legal experts is to limit your information to answering factual questions, or to refer the customer to factual information online, say from the state education department. Be the source of the source. But stay away from the trap of using or responding to labels such as good schools or nice schools. NAR keeps trying to remind its members, and we'll have more to say, I think, on this subject of schools in the next few months and years, keeps trying to remind members experts in schools and realtors are not the same thing. Realtors are not experts. One example, if you're basing your suggestions about schools, your opinion about schools on school test scores don't tell you how good schools are. Write that on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores tell you how educated are the parents that send their kids to that school. So is it appropriate to keep referring some buyers based on school test scores when it just reinforces segregation? That's not a public spirited approach. It might be more public community spirited, and it keeps within the law, to explain to parents that they need to do their homework. It is okay to tell customers that there are fair housing laws for good reason that limit what advice any agent can give them about schools. It's okay to educate parents. Did you know school test scores don't tell you how good the schools are? It's okay to tell parents, if schools are important to you, talk with other parents, chat with the principal, go see the teachers in the programs that are important to you. Not everybody wants the same thing in schools. If they were buying a boat, if boats were important to them, they'd go out and look at boats.
So, Bill, what was the reaction from the real estate industry and government?
Oh, I'm asked what happened to the agents in these videos. Well, we know that disciplinary hearings for the agents continue in New York for about 100 people altogether, agents and their brokers. And one agent or two gave up their license instead of going through the disciplinary process. I know of 2 agents that won their cases and got to keep their license. The agent you met who warned the white buyer about gang activity and didn't warn the black buyer, she's still practicing. The judge said, well, the state didn't even investigate. They just brought us the news story. They didn't bring us the testers, didn't interview them, didn't look at the listings the testers were given. And the judge said, I'm not taking somebody's license away if the state won't even bother to investigate. We'll see what happens in other cases. There was a hearing, and you can watch it online, where the agents and the brokers had to testify under oath. The agent who said, follow the school bus, see what mothers are hanging around to meet the bus. She said, I just meant for the customers to learn where the bus routes were. The most surprising part of the hearing was that the brokers all said, we reviewed the tests and nobody did anything wrong. New York's legislature knew better than that and has changed laws in our state calling for testing by the state attorney general's office. Nationally, NAR has taken a very vigorous approach to responding to Newsday's investigation. And I just want to mention a couple of the steps that NAR has taken. First, many of you are familiar with Fairhaven, which is at fairhaven.realtor. It's a video game. Many of you have taken it. It's a simulation where you're trying to close deals. You're the agent or you're the customer, and you encounter fair housing issues. It's really well done. This is the movie part of driver's ed. That's the driving part of driver's ed. Very effective, fairhaven.realtor. And I encourage everybody in your office to go through it. NAR is rolling out a course on implicit bias, a 3-credit CE course. NAR has been working with state associations to recommend tougher enforcement of fair housing laws. More enforcement, tougher regulations. Think about that. A trade association asking for tougher enforcement in the states. We've shared the link to Fairhaven. And NAR is supporting those companies and associations that are trying self-testing of agents. It won't be public, but that's a pretty good deterrent if you knew that your brokerage might be testing you. So all of this seems like a pretty useful response.
So based on your investigations, what do you think are the best ways to combat racism in real estate?
Yeah, well, so eliminating racism seems like a heavy lift. Let's just focus on equal treatment, fair treatment for everyone. Let's talk about some best practices. I hope you've jotted down some that brokers and agents might take. First, it seemed clear that many realtors in our tests were unfamiliar with minority neighborhoods. They didn't know about the beautiful new homes on the water in Freeport. After the stories in Atlanta, one of the banks put lenders on a bus and drove them around so they could see the magnificent new subdivisions being built in what would be Black areas of town. And they said they were unfamiliar. They didn't know these existed. Maybe a bus tour to show the variety in your community is not really such a bad idea. We noticed that our large real estate brands had more than 200 branch offices in our area, but not a single one was in the 8 communities where most of the Black residents live. They didn't represent many sellers in those areas. What we saw in our test makes me wonder whether brokers do anything to check on whether or not agents are steering. For example, brokers, do you audit what listings are given to customers? Do you know what their objective criteria were and what neighborhoods and schools they got and what other areas matched up with their actual criteria? It might be useful to you to make a map of where your offices are located, where your agents represent sellers, where your agents send people to listings, to open houses, and then look at what areas get skipped over, if any. Who gets hopscotched and what are the characteristics? How does that look when that map gets dragged into court in a fair housing case? Does your MLS tell you which schools and communities your agents choose? If not, maybe you should be demanding that so you know what that information looks like before it can end up in court. I want to give a quick word on this to our law professor, Bob Schwem from Kentucky, one of our advisors. Warning, he really steps up to the plate here and takes a swing, but it's just a brief clip from the law professor who writes the textbook on fair housing. Here we go.
I'm a law professor at the University of Kentucky, and I've been a law professor for a long number of years. All we're asking in these tests, you get 2 people who come in and ask for exactly the same thing. Why don't you give them the same listing? Why don't you pre-qualify them in exactly the same way? It's not that big a burden. This is a law. This should be treated like a tax law or any other law. You have to obey this law, and particularly if you're in a licensed business like real estate agents, if you can't obey the law, you ought to just get out.
Now, I told you he was going to step up and take a swing. Maybe that seems harsh. I think the complicated part of that, though, is that I assume that you all want to obey the law, that you all want to treat people fairly. The hard part may be recognizing how unequal treatment can creep in. Because remember, differences in treatment are more likely to be unintentional based on a loose process, lack of supervision that allows people to act on stereotypes or ignorance. That's what people mean by systemic discrimination. They mean it's not an individual bad actor. It's the way the system's set up that allows people to act on stereotype. Now, I want to quickly show you some best practices from NAR. We're going to close on this. That are suggestions from NAR about specific steps that you might take. You should be seeing a screen here. First, a couple of screens where you are seeing about our investigation and meeting some of our testers. On this screen, I see a nurse, a university professor, an IRS worker, and a couple of actors. New York is lousy with unemployed actors, so we used a lot of them too. Now let's go to some specific best practices. Every customer should receive the same behavior from you. Show no more interest in one customer than another. If you offer hospitality, a drink to the person who comes into the office, a warm greeting, offer it to everybody. Follow up with every customer in the same way. You know, checklists are really helpful in surgery, in landing an airplane. Checklists help make sure that we don't miss any steps. You can use checklists to make sure everyone in your office provides the same information to every customer. Do you use the same procedure for assigning customers to agents, not based on the appearance of the customer, but you have a procedure for that? Do you obtain the same initial information from every customer? Do you explain your commitment to fair housing laws? Do you offer the same referrals and services to every buyer or every seller? Does every buyer leave your office with the same information, the same handouts? Do you keep good records of these contacts with customers? So in a legal case, you could prove that you do the same thing every time. Do you work out standard answers or scripts for your brokerage on the difficult questions, such as which schools are good? Do you convey the same helpful information to every client? And it's okay to explain school test scores don't tell you which schools are good. Do you use templates, in effect, canned text for texts and emails to customers to ensure that you provide them with all the same information? Do you talk about the property, not about the people? Identify objective information about what the customer wants and talk about what housing is available to meet those criteria. Talk about market trends, talk about prices, but not about populations. And don't suggest that some buyers hang around by the school or the 7-Eleven to look at who's in the neighborhood. Now, do you stick to factual information, not opinion? The reputation of a community is not a fact. Declining schools is not a fact. Do you refer customers to primary sources of information? Be the source of the source. If they ask about crime, refer to them to the police departments. If they ask about schools, urge them to visit schools or to look at school report cards on state websites. Do you qualify customers in the same way? If you require a buyer agreement, require it from every buyer. If you ask one customer for ID, ask everybody. If you require pre-approval from every buyer, require it from everyone. If you offer referrals, do it for everyone. Give everybody all the listings that meet their objective criteria. Allow the customer to make the choices about features of the housing and the price and communities or schools. They get all the listings until they give you more criteria. It's just like a Google search. The more you type in, the less you get. The more criteria they give you, the fewer listings will meet those criteria. Maybe they need a primary bedroom on the main level. They need a corner lot, or they need a 3-car garage. Then they get fewer listings when they pick certain school districts. Remember, you have an obligation not to discriminate against sellers or neighborhoods. You can educate buyers about the fair housing laws. And you can do this before an owner exerts pressure on you to discriminate against certain renters or certain shoppers. You can explain that the same rules apply to every agent, and for good reason. If an owner insists on making discriminatory choices and forcing those on you, no children, no vouchers, don't bring any of those people to come see the home, then you have to tell them that they need to find another agent. I understand that you have a financial obligation to follow instructions and to work in the best interest of your client. But that obligation ends when their instructions are illegal. NAR keeps urging us to say no to love letters or pick me letters. You can specify in your written agreements, you can tell sellers up front, I won't pass those letters on to you. Why does NAR discourage those letters? Because they reveal information about protected classes, family status, race, religion, children, age. So they tempt the seller into a violation. And consider whether your association should go further. Consider whether your association should prohibit those letters in the MLS. In other words, in the listing agreement, when you list a home, you could prohibit sellers, agents from passing those on to sellers. 2 more suggestions. Present offers with only the financial information and terms, not the names and characteristics of the buyers. And use NAR's equal service report. You'll find that form in the brokerage handbook chapter on fair housing. It's a form for documenting customer contacts. So you can identify, did we do the same thing for everybody? Did we give listings that meet the objective criteria? It's a way of identifying failures and correcting them. You also can survey customers who've lost contact with your brokerage to find out why. Now, back with you. I just want to give this closing thought, and then we'll take some questions quickly. You know, NAR makes these 2 simple suggestions for how to avoid steering. And just think about these 2 and notice that they're contradictory. The simple suggestions are: 1, give the buyer all the listings that meet their objective criteria. That's a good suggestion. And the suggestion is pay attention to implicit bias. Think, well, why might I have eliminated certain areas? Well, that's a good, well-meaning suggestion, but you recognize the conflict. If you're giving the buyer all the listings that meet their objective criteria, why would you be eliminating any areas at all that the customer hasn't eliminated? In other words, the main way to stop steering, the only sure way that a broker can be sure that an agent is giving the same listings to 2 customers. And the only way that a broker can be sure that 2 different agents, because that's the legal standard, 2 different agents are giving the same listings to 2 customers with similar criteria. The only way to be sure of that is to give everybody, as the professor says, why don't you give them all the listings? The way to stop steering illegally is to stop steering at all. I hope this has been helpful to you. I hope you have a movie night with your colleagues and your customers. The film, the project, the stories are all at one address. It's simply newsday.com/divided, newsday.com/divided. But I hope you'll go beyond that. I hope you'll have a conversation in your office about, well, how does it work? How do we answer the tough questions about schools? What are our procedures? What records do we keep? What records do we demand? do we in fact get the same information and give the same information to every customer? And how are we sure that we do that before we're tested, before there's a fair housing case against our brokerage? Because those cases are not covered under your errors and omissions insurance.
So, Bill, we had one question in the chat. So, if you could briefly tell us, did your investigation, did it look at language and culture of the agent and the contributing factors involved?
No, we didn't feel like there was any, in almost 100 tests, you get enough information to be able to say, look, it's definitely very easy to find evidence of steering. We didn't have to hunt for it. We were never prompting the agents to tell us about schools. It was always the agents who would start steering based on schools. You could feel very firm about that, but we didn't feel like there were enough agents of any subgroup. There were South Asian agents that steered, and there were Jewish agents or Middle Eastern background agents that steered. But we didn't feel confident in saying, well, this is a characteristic of that particular subgroup, because those groups wouldn't be large enough to have run into them more than a few times in our tests. It was clear that it wasn't just white agents. It wasn't just agents who were raised on Long Island. We got no hint at all that there was some characteristic of a particular agents did this and others didn't. We just got whatever agents the brokers gave us, and many of them were very experienced. It didn't seem from a lack of experience or training. We did send people to the classes in New York, and we wrote about how very weak the fair housing classes were, hardly mentioned steering, and the state of New York scrapped its training in fair housing and started over with a new curriculum because they understood that the classes were very poor. They were required classes, but they hardly covered the material that we're talking about here today.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. It was eye-opening, great information. Just to let our members know, we will be sending out the fair housing resources to you, as well as his full documentary and a follow-up email. So we want to thank you again, Bill, for taking your time to talk about your investigation, and hopefully you all gained tips today. So have a great afternoon. Thank you so much.
You're very kind. Thank you all for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.